Proceed to Mr. Redwine. All right. Court has been notified that juror number 9 has a fever, so he will not be in today, and which would remove him from jury service. We did contact him, not me, but the bailiff. He has been fully vaccinated, so the odds of him passing him this on, if it is COVID, it could be a lot of other things too. The odds of that being passed on are pretty small. Jurors have been maintaining not 6 feet, but they've been maintaining approximately 3 feet distance from each other, and they should be also fully vaccinated, or else they should be wearing masks. So my plan is to replace number 9 with the first lowest numbered alternate person, and you all know who that is, as a juror, and just go forward. I also intend to talk to the jury about this when they come out, and see if they're going to have any issues with it. So, is that all right? Anything from the prosecution? Nothing from the PBI. Okay.
Your Honor, how do you plan on talking to the rest of the jury about it? Individually or as a group? Or
as a group.
Okay. And then if they want to talk about it?
If they want to talk about it individually, we can do that.
Okay.
So with that, so you're okay with that?
Everyone who's without a mask is vaccinated. Juror number 9's the closest one to the flat screen TV and the witness stands, where counsel spends a certain amount of our time during the examination, so that does cause concern from our part. I do not object to the court's process.
All right. Well, I believe you guys are fully vaccinated too, or you'd be wearing masks. So, just go ahead.
Thank you. The people have no objections for letting the jury know why the jury is no longer with us your trial. I would also ask for
Oh, yeah. And that's fine. I was planning on that, assuming I remember to do it.
Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Judge. Just briefly, our next witness is Rae Randolph. There was extensive cross-examination at motions hearing on her testimony. As the court recalls, her testimony was more expansive there because it didn't just include the single instance of the pillowcase and trailing here. Mr. Moran, at that hearing, had a line of questioning about her a disciplinary action, an attorney regulation. I would move to exclude that line of questioning. I don't think it's relevant here. And there are plenty of questions that Mr. Moran can ask directly about training records in a handling capacity. So I think under 403, that's more prejudicial. And then I just want to make sure we stay tightly focused on the trailing, as I intend to do for the court's order.
Mr. Moran?
Actually, Ms. Randolph is my witness, so I can address this, Judge. That is correct. We've all reviewed the transcript of the Shrek hearing regarding Ms. Randolph. The questioning regarding ARC's action with Ms. Randolph's license was addressing several different issues. One was, I think it was commingling of clients' funds, charging an unreasonable fee, and not keeping proper records of clients' trust funds. The line of questioning at the motions hearing was tied directly to statements she had made that her record keeping regarding dog training and SELA was not up to caliber, and that in fact record keeping for her had been, in her own words, not up to caliber. So I think and the fact of the matter is that she's also testified at that hearing and provided information that she tries to train her dogs in accordance with all sorts of scientific procedures, requirements by other groups. So, and there are minimum requirements for record keeping regarding trailing dogs, accreditation, training, and whatnot. And I think it's fair cross-examination to make an inquiry of her about her lack of good record keeping on these issues, something that she's admitted to and something that's, I think, abundantly clear in the information we received from her. And if she denies that record keeping has been a struggle or that it hasn't been up to caliber, I think that opens up impeachment materials, including the finding by ARC that her license that she be put on probation for 2 years, all but 90 days suspended, provided she did some other stuff because of her lack of good record keeping. So this is an issue in her law practice, and it's an issue in how she trains dogs.
Well, first of all, I've not read her disciplinary opinion or record. I haven't seen that. However, I am aware, well, I believe that wasn't the major focus of the disciplinary action. It was something else regarding an inmate at the jail, and I won't go any further than that. And I think it was an unthinking thing that she did, not a conscious thing. I thought that was the major reason she had the problem. These other things were probably related. I don't see it as being something that's fair game at this point. It's really something, I would tend to agree with Mr. Johnson that it's a 403 problem, and I'm going to initially deny cross-examination of that issue under 403. However, I do agree with you, Mr. Bogan, it more or less depends on her testimony also, and that might become fair game. So if you plan on going that direction, just ask her to approach the bench and talk about it up here. I'll have to listen to what she has to say. So that's number one. Number two, I'm sure you will limit it, other than the record keeping, that you'll limit your testimony to the trailer and nothing else. So that was pretty much what I said in my order.
Right. I mean, and while we're on the topic of Ms. Randolph, one of the people's exhibits shows the reliability rating of Sella, and it lists several different dates where the dog either smelled stuff or didn't, and at least 3 of those dates regarding her performance or reliability rating, she was doing training on not just trailing, but cadaver work as well. So, and I know that...
I would think that's okay, Mr. Do you have an issue about that, Mr.
Actually, Judge, I can clarify, too, in reviewing the exhibits. I prepared more exhibits than we're actually admitting, depending on how testimony goes. I think that's 187. I don't intend to admit that. I do intend to just ask her about her training and about lost records as well. So I think all these topics are going to come up, but I'm not putting 187 in at this juncture.
All right. If counsel's strategy as to 187 changes, I'm going to want to make a further record regarding that, because I think there's things in that exhibit that are not relevant to the work that happened at the La Plata County Fairgrounds in 2012. And I don't want to say the cadaver word, because that's an electric third rail with this witness, so she's not allowed to testify about it.
It'll be an interesting hour and a half, however long it lasts. So with that, you want to bring up the jury?
By all means.
Oh, yeah, I did hear that. So we're good on that. Okay. Ray Rice, please. All right, we can be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we're missing one of your members, and because this is being streamed and for privacy reasons, I'm not going to refer to the juror by name. So I'm not trying to be rude, but that's just trying to be nice, I guess. I do want to let you know that this juror did have a fever, so he's not here. Doesn't necessarily mean that he got COVID. He has informed us that he's fully vaccinated, has been fully vaccinated for quite a while. So if it is COVID, the odds of him passing it on are fairly small. You all should not have a problem with it either, because you should all be vaccinated since you're not wearing masks. And I just need to know if this is going to cause anybody a problem in terms of being able to concentrate on the case, or they're going to be worried about their safety so much they can't serve as a juror. And if anybody wants to talk about that now, you can. If it's something that you would rather talk about outside the presence of other people, we can do that also. So does anybody have any issues with that going forward with the case? Okay. If you change your mind, let Cindy know, and we'll talk to you about it. What that also means is because it's such a long trial, we did have 4 alternates. So one of the persons, I know you don't know who the alternates are, we do. So one of the jurors who was going to be an alternate has now been made a member of the actual jury. So we won't have a problem in terms of our numbers. With that, prosecution's first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Rae Randolph.
Okay, raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Have a seat. You speak up louder than that, okay?
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Could you please start by introducing yourself to the jury by your full name?
I'm Rae Randolph. My last name is spelled Randolph.
And ma'am, what do you do for work?
Right now, I am working with a children's book that I just wrote, a book to help kids recover from the grief of losing a dog.
What was your previous occupation?
I was a criminal defense attorney for 35 years.
And where did you practice?
For about 22 of those years, I practiced in Minneapolis, St. Paul area in Minnesota, and then I moved out here to Colorado and practiced down here in the southern areas of Montezuma County, PLATA County, and Archuleta County.
And back in 2012, were you practicing here as a defense attorney?
Yes.
And did you also do volunteer work at that time with search and rescue?
Yes, I started doing volunteer work with search and rescue in the latter part of 2006.
2006?
Yes.
Until when?
I'm still part of La Plata County Search and Rescue, but I'm not as active with that particular group as I used to be, but I still have a dog that is used.
Okay. So in mentioning a dog was part of your work with search and rescue, working with canine units?
Yes, I had a dog that I started with there that has passed.
Okay. And when did you start handling canines in general?
That dog I got in 2006 and started working to train her that year, and she passed in 2013.
Was that your first dog that you handled?
Yes.
And was that Selah?
That's Selah.
And then I want to talk just a little bit about search and rescue, but what types of functions does search and rescue use dogs for?
They use dogs for finding lost people, children of all ages, and they also use dogs to clear areas on some of our larger searches. When there's a lot of different assets in the field, you might have a technical ropes team, people on the ground. Dogs are very useful to clear areas, to keep other valuable assets elsewhere.
So if someone's lost in the woods, is a dog a useful tool to try to locate them, for example?
Oh, yes.
And you talked about Selah. You got her in 2006, around the same time you started with search and rescue. Did you have any kind of background into handling, or is that when you got interested in it?
I had a little bit of background back when I lived in Minnesota with my first German Shepherd. Kind of learned a little bit about the game there, but really started to, I bought Selah specifically for the purpose of search and rescue.
And were there more than one canine unit in search and rescue around 2012?
Yes. There were, when we say canine unit, you mean a handler and a dog?
Yeah.
Yes. I don't remember exactly the number. I'm going to I remember 5
Okay.
off the top of my head.
5 different teams working with search and rescue.
Yes.
Okay. So can you give the jury a little bit of the overview of the specific trainings you've had in the area and how you developed the knowledge about canine handling?
As I started to say, back in Minnesota, I had a shepherd that I got a little bit of background on trailing with that particular dog. Then when I moved here, I specifically wanted a dog that had that in her genetic pool. And because I liked that whole process of trailing. So I started with a trainer. I asked my breeder, Salah's breeder, where to start in terms of training. She recommended a woman up in Montana by the name of Chris Goodhue with Tri-State Canine, and I started going to seminars with her with my dog Salah. I think it was in 2007.
Okay. And then did you have other dogs over the years and do other trainings, et cetera, leading up to 2012?
Salah was my only dog during that period of time, up to 2012.
From 2006 to 2012?
Yeah.
Okay. And then how about after that? You said you're still currently working with search and rescue.
Yes.
Have you continued to learn about dogs, handling, and deploy them in the field?
Yes. So in 2013, I got my current dog, Oso, and I've gone further with him. He's multi-certified through North American Police Working Dogs in human remains detection, obedience, which I question sometimes, but he is certified in obedience, and he was also certified so he's been multi-certified in those disciplines.
How about trailing?
I've never tried to certify him in trailing. I'm concentrating just on human remains detection with him.
I don't think this canine's relevant also to the proceedings today, Judge.
I can move on, Judge. So I want to turn your attention back. You're talking about this idea of how you use the dog in the field. So with Salah, what specific training did Salah have related to trailing? Actually, let me ask you a question first. Sorry about that. What is trailing?
Well, trailing, some people say tracking and trailing to mean the same thing. They're two distinct things. Trailing is following odor, typically close to the ground, but odor can also move. So they're not necessarily in a tracking scenario following a straight line like this. In tracking, it's more of a term used amongst like the Schutzhund competition people. And in tracking, the dog's nose is following actual footprints, so disturbed vegetation and that kind of thing. In trailing, a large component is the scent discrimination issue, because part of what we do to train a dog in trailing.
Hold on a second.
I don't think this witness has been qualified and offered as an expert yet. I understand that there's been some foundational work and questioning regarding what trailing is, but now that we're getting into scent discrimination, I think the foundation is lacking at this time for her to talk to the jury about that.
I think that's probably correct, Mr. Johnson.
Sure, Judge. I'll ask a couple more questions on another note and circle back.
Okay.
So, Ms. Randolph, have you had training specific to trailing over the years?
Yes.
And what kind of trainings have you gone to from, let's target the 2006 to the 2012 timeframe?
I went to several specific trailing seminars where I learned the scent discrimination aspect and trailing with this dog. She was bred for this in particular, so it was me that had to learn how to tell her or teach her scent discrimination and the reward. You can
to direct you to the sort of foundational questions, how many seminars have you been to about trailing? kind of work?
I recall 4.
Okay. And are those like weekend-long things, or are they single day? What do they look like?
They were, I think all of them were with Chris Goodhue. She might have had another trainer with her, but they were all with Tri-State. And so they would have been at least 3 days, probably more like 4 days long.
And then when you do those seminars, do you take that knowledge and did you do actual training with Selah yourself?
Absolutely.
What is that? Is that training that you do exercises for reliability, et cetera?
We did exercises, taking what we learned at those seminars and applied them here. A lot of times we mention the search and rescue group as a whole, the large group. We like to say it takes a village to train a dog. And so a lot of times we were using, it wasn't just me training my dog, it was whoever I could round up at search and rescue to help with that process. Because in scent discrimination training, you need to use various people, various terrains, various scenarios, and so we were constantly incorporating that with other people, volunteers from the larger team.
These are the other teams within search and rescue too?
Yes.
And then how often were you doing training exercises on a weekly basis?
If I could get someone to lay a track for me or lay a trail for me in a park, it kind of varied. Definitely it was once a week with the large canine team. And then because all of us, that's the day we could all get together. If there was time during the week that I could get someone, like I started to say, to lay a trail for me through a contaminated area, I would do that. It was on, I would say a good average was twice a week consistently, but that would also vary if I had time away from work and that kind of thing.
And then I'll circle back to this in more detail, but generally speaking, did you also deploy Selah out in the field in those years?
Yes.
And multiple times?
She had approximately 10 different missions.
Okay. And then did you at one point, we'll get into this in more detail too, but at one point did you bring her through the certification process on trailing?
I did.
Your Honor, at this time I'd move to qualify Ms. Randolph as an expert in scent trailing, canine handling and search and rescue, and scent-specific handling.
I want one answer, and then I'll let you respond. When you say you put her through the trailing certification, or if I'm getting that right, I forget, is that the right word? Yes, trailing the certification. Was she certified? That's my question.
Yes, she was. She passed, yes.
Response?
Wadir, following up on the court's question.
Yes.
When was that certification?
That was May of 2010.
And very specific question here. Do you have documentation of those once to twice a week exercises with local search and rescue?
I believe the ones that I have been disclosed in discovery.
The ones that you have documentation of have been disclosed.
Objection, Judge, beyond the scope, and we're going to cover this. Beyond the scope of the actual voir dire.
I think it is, Mr. Bogan. I think it is something that's probably right for cross-examination.
We'll renew our objections for the record based upon previous proceedings and object as to foundation and as to lack of certification.
Well, based upon previous proceedings and what's been presented here, the court does qualify Ms. Randolph as an expert in as a handler of trailing dogs.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Randolph, let me direct your attention now. I want to talk specifically about Selah. So what breed was Selah?
She was a German Shepherd dog, Czechoslovakian line.
Is that a typical dog used in this type of trailing work?
Oh, yes.
And then now you had started to tell the jury about trailing, and I just want to finish that topic. And I think you had gotten as far as saying it's scent specific and the odor moves around in the air. Can you explain how that translates to the work that you do on search and rescue?
Okay. So I need to give just a little bit of information before I go into that. The way a trailing dog, and a dog of this caliber would smell or distinguish odor is if we walk into a room and we smell spaghetti sauce cooking on the stove, we smell spaghetti sauce. A dog can discriminate the difference between the tomato, the oregano, olive oil, the different ingredients specifically within that. They smell all of those things separately. So when you're training in trailing, if you have a specific odor, say it's a little girl, or let's say it's me, and you want Bela to find me, you have to have a scent article that's associated with me, something that I've worn, something that I use, something that is mine. And so as a handler, you have to be very careful when you get that scent source that you're going to train your dog on, that you are the one that collects it. Because when I sent her on a scent article, she's going to distinguish, there's Ray's hand, this is Rae and her odor, but here's this other odor here that's got all the collective odors of whoever it is I'm having her track in that scent article, so that she's able to distinguish in her brain and learn, I'm not tracking mom because she's right here, I'm tracking this. And so we teach that inherent skill that she has, teaching her that to discriminate that odor of the scent article from every other odor that she's trailing through with the reward.
Let me ask you a little bit about that. So let's say I'm out on the trail and I'm lost, but at the trailhead I drop my water bottle and it has my name on it. Everyone knows it's my water bottle. Can you use that water bottle to help trail with Bela to try to find me?
If I could find something else that wasn't out exposed, I would use that instead.
What would be some good examples?
A good example is, well, we've used everything when training Bela, from lipstick to an article of clothing to gloves to a headband to, in those old Nalgene's when you had that little plastic thing you'd stick in there, I use those. We tried to vary everything from small to large.
So all of these items you're talking about, it's not just clothing and things that might get more smelly. It's actually some hard objects, too.
Absolutely.
The noses are good enough to use that kind of thing?
Yes.
And then when you have that known article, can you just explain to the jury in trailing how you would work that article to try to locate the person?
So as I started to say, when she's part of the training process is you have a ritual. When I'd take her from the truck, put her trailing harness on, I'd have the scent article with me, and it's usually in a Ziploc container of some kind, and go to whatever my point last seen was, wherever I was going to start my trail. And the actual act of scenting the dog, it's very passive and calm, because the dogs are very drivey and motivated. And so you want to be very calm, and I would reach around her with the Ziploc bag and open it and just let her on her own put her nose on there. Some people put the whole dog's nose in there. I didn't have to really do that with Bela. She would smell it. And then as soon as I gave her the command, was nose down, and she'd go. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then
Okay.
she's basically following the odor in the air to the source.
She follows the odor. Trailing dogs are going to follow odor. They will pop their head up and air scent, but most of the time their nose is down. She came out of the womb with her nose down. She was bred for this. So the odor she would hunt for would be on the ground. She would check to make sure she was on it, but usually we were, especially in the early parts of training, you're going to have their nose, you want their nose on the ground.
And then let's say there's other articles from other people along the trail. Is she going to be able to know that that scent is not from me when I'm missing?
Yes, we would work, obviously in the early part of training, we wouldn't inundate her with all kinds of odor. As she's learning the game and becoming better and better at it, she would discriminate between a cross track, for instance, people walking around an area, other people out looking for you when you're lost. She needs to not follow people that are also on search and rescue, she needs to be able to discriminate to follow you through all those different odors that are out there.
Okay. Now, let's say I dropped my hat when I was lost in the woods, and she was trailing the odor. Would she be able to determine and indicate to you that that was my hat, so you knew you were going the right way?
Yes.
How would she do that?
She had what we call a trained final response of a sit. If she would find that odor, she usually would go through a change of behavior and either like an alert behavior, more excited. Usually her hackles were up, tails up. We call it rafting. They almost sound like they're snorting a little bit to get the scent up to check the scent, and she would sit.
Okay. And then she wouldn't do that if it was, say, Christian's hat?
No.
You talked about the breed being German Shepherd, but you also talked about the lineage. Is that something that's important as well?
Absolutely.
Judge, can I approach the People's 188, please?
Yes.
Have you seen 188 before?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Is that a picture of Selah
Yes.
back when she was in search and rescue?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, I move to admit People's 188 in evidence.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
Submitted.
And I publish briefly, Your Honor.
You may.
So you had mentioned German Shepherd and then some of the lineage background. So this is Selah?
That's her, yes.
Can you just talk about why that background from her as a dog when you got her was important?
Objection as to foundation. She's not certified in genetics.
She's choosing the dog for handling, Your Honor.
I think she can justify as to why she chose this breed. That's appropriate. Excuse me. You want that again?
Thank you, Judge. Why?
Hold on. We had someone coughing and I wasn't close to the microphone. Okay. Well, I have to remember what I said.
I remember, Judge. Why did you choose this breed and lineage?
Okay. I think she can testify as to this breed and lineage because she was choosing a dog for scent tracking, and I think it's part of her expertise. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Why did you choose this breed and lineage?
I chose this breed and lineage. Well, I'd always liked German Shepherds. I had two prior to her. And I chose this lineage because her sire was one of the stud dogs for the Royal Canadian Mounted Patrol that are world-renowned trailing dogs used in their law enforcement program. And she came along as available, and I snatched her up.
And then also, Ms. Randolph, you talked about training exercises and things like that. Can you just walk the jury through what a basic training exercise might look like? Briefly, but like what you would set out, how you would go about it, and how you would evaluate it?
Sure. We had one type of a scenario, I guess, for scent discrimination trailing. We called it a STAR PLS. PLS stands for point last seen, for an alleged, subject that you'd be looking for. And what that was you would flag out a square area, probably could be anything from like 20 yards, maybe 20 yards square. And I liked to get 4 different people that would enter the square on any one person per side, walk within that square, walk around, and really get it good and contaminated. Then they would, let's say they do that for 60 seconds or so, period of time, and then walk out from that PLS, everyone in a different direction. So you've got a contaminated, concentrated area with 4 different odored trails going from there. And they could, as the dog got better and better at this game, they could go longer in the PLS area and out further. So then what you would do with the dog, everyone that was participating in this exercise would have a separate scent article that we would get from them, and they would put it themselves in a Ziploc bag and set it away from the training area with their colored flag on it. So I knew if I picked up that Article A, that I'm going to be looking for the person that's with, let's say, the red flag. And there was 4 different ones. And you could work the dog 4 different times with this particular scenario. So what we would do is scent her away from the scent articles and cast her around the plasticine area. So you have this concentrated odor in this point last-seen area that's now emanating everywhere, contaminating, and she has to distinguish not only that odor, but pick the correct track that she's going around to follow and find her person. So a lot of times it was nice if we had live people, especially when training was new, because I wanted a live person to be there rewarding her. We're associating this trailing scent-specific behavior with a reward. And as she got better and better at the game, that person didn't have to stick around. They could leave another article of theirs out there for her to find, and it was sufficient for me to praise her off of it.
And so she would go from that primary starting location and go locate either the person or the article amongst other odors. Yes,
and then she could work that same problem a total of 4 times with different people.
Sure. Did you use other articles at times to attempt to distract her as well, like other articles from other people as she did the course?
Oh, certainly, yeah. We would use, we had another scenario called staggered starts, and without boring you in the details, because sometimes these got kind of complicated, it would be tracks going through other tracks, other cross tracks, and other items that the dog would have to work through and discriminate through.
Okay. And training records is it typical in handling to keep records of training?
For search and rescue? Typical, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Are there trainings you kept records for and trainings that you didn't?
Yes.
Are there training records that you lost?
Yes.
Okay. So as you come to this case, did you ever anticipate any work you did in the Redwine case would be going to court?
No.
But did you provide the records that you have?
Yes.
So give the jury a sense for what a training record looks like.
Well, a training record would be, sometimes we kept track of the miles we drove, the names of people that were present, the dogs that were worked. When we'd show up at a training, every team, every handler and canine were on a different trajectory. So not everybody was working on the same thing at the same time. Some dogs accelerated faster than other dogs. So we needed to know who was working on what. And so you put in there words to the effect of, well, what's your criteria? What are you looking for to do with your dog? What are the goals that you wish to accomplish? And then let's say, for example, that STAR PLS that we had up there, I put that up. Sometimes I might draw it out, sometimes I might not, and just to show what she did. Then if there was an area that she needed to work on, you'd want to mark that in there and tell how she did with that, what you want to work on next time, what your goals and objectives would be for the next time. Because you're always wanting to progress for the dog to become better and better.
Do you indicate on there, in addition to the circumstances of the testing, whether there's misses or whether there's accurate alerts,
Yes.
responses?
Yes. And absolutely. If she early on would take a wrong track, she'd pick up the wrong thing or do the wrong one, you'd want to mark that on there as something that, and then maybe look at, well, why did she take that wrong track? What was going on? What maybe did I do setting it up? Did, was there an error? Because you want to make sure you're just distinguishing between the dog get it right and you just didn't see that she got it right, or was there something in setting up the problem that was wrong, or was she just having a bad day?
Okay. And then we talked about 2006 starting, so I want to just draw your attention to 2006 to 2013, roughly. I'm just going to be direct about this. Is it fair you could have kept better records?
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Do you keep better records now that you're on your subsequent dog?
Yes.
Relevance now versus 2012.
I think it's slightly relevant, so it's okay.
So, but were there some records you kept that when the case became a criminal case, you gave to us, we put in discovery, et cetera?
Yes, absolutely.
Generally speaking, was Selah an accurate dog in a training setting?
She was. Yes, she was.
Did you trust her to the point where you put her out in the field if there was a person missing?
Yes.
And did your team trust her to go out in the field when a person was missing in the woods?
Hearsay.
Mr. Johnson?
I don't think that it is, Judge. It just goes to the reliability and it's foundational, and it's whether she was deployed or not.
Other folks' opinions as to the reliability of this dog is offered for the truth of the matter. Hearsay.
I have sustained the objection.
Was Selah, given the training you'd done, et cetera, a dog that was actively deployed by search and rescue on rescue missions?
Yes, they trusted her enough to put her
So let me stop you. I don't want to ask if they trusted you or not. The judge had a ruling on that. What I do want to ask you is, based on your experience with her, your training, your work with the team, was this, and you talked about accuracy and training, et cetera, was this a dog that was used in the field in those years if someone was missing out in the woods?
Oh, yes.
So you talked about 2006 was when you first got Selah. By 2010, did you attempt to certify her to see if she could pass the trailing test by an objective party?
Yes. We, because I've been training out of state a lot in terms of seminars, we didn't really have a testing authority. There really isn't one here in Colorado. And so I went up to Montana and had her tested up there.
Okay. And was that an independent evaluator doing that testing?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, I'm going to move to approach of People's 186.
All right.
So, Ms. Randolph, have you seen People's 186 before?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a trailing certification from May of 2010 when you brought her to Montana to be tested for certification?
Yes. There was another copy where the second evaluator had signed, but separately.
Judge, I don't think this is responsive or foundational. It's kind of self-help rehab.
Well, I don't know about that, but let's just answer his questions.
Sure. There's a signature on there by Chris Goodhue.
Yes.
Is that the evaluator?
She was one of them, yes.
Okay. And you have a second copy that would have an additional signature on it?
Yes.
Can you look at that document and see if it's otherwise consistent with the certification you received, et cetera?
It's consistent.
Okay. Is there an expiration date on the certification itself indicated on the document?
Yes.
What's the expiration date of the certification?
May 2012.
So it's a 2-year certification?
Yes.
And to be clear with the jury, by November of 2012, what we're going to talk about, this had expired by its expiration date.
Yes.
Did you ever recertify Selah again?
No. In trailing?
Yeah.
No.
Why not?
I didn't get up there to get her tested.
Is that something in search and rescue that might be different from, say, a police dog in terms of how frequently you would certify, et cetera?
Yes.
Objection, relevance.
Well, I think it's relevant.
So in the search and rescue context, after you passed her through the test, did you continue to work her in the field and continued training exercises, et cetera?
Oh, yes.
So at this time, I'm going to move to admit People's 186 into evidence, please.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
Submitted.
So it's fair to say to the jury that Selah had shown she could do the test, but also you didn't keep testing her year after year like some other handlers might in some other settings.
No.
Let's talk about the test itself. First, could I publish 186, please? So is this what that trailing certification looks like?
Yes.
Okay. And then is there a second page on the trailing certification that shows sort of a little bit about the test itself?
Yes, that's her actual GPS track on the test itself. It starts on where number 132. I don't think the 132, and it moves to the left.
And then is there a third page that kind of explains the criteria if anyone's interested later in what SALA has to do to certify?
Yes.
That's the third page there. Around the right there.
That's it.
So to be efficient with time, I'm just going to go back to the second page. Can you just explain to the jury what was required for SALA to?
She had to, there was a track laid that was a mile long. It had to age at least 4 hours. At the point last seen, there was another person, whoever was the actual subject, left the point last seen contemporaneously with another person who went in a different direction. There was a cross track, I think 2/3 of the way through the track that had to be, I think, laid within a half an hour before the dog started the test. So it was a fresh, hot, what we call a hot track, laid over this one.
And she was successful in completing everything in terms of the evaluator's assessment?
Yes.
I want to segue to experience in the field. I think you already testified that SALA was in the search and rescue context where someone's lost in the woods.
Yes.
Does she work in conjunction with other teams when they...
myself and make a determination of, you know, the facts of what's happening. Do we have a small child? Do we have a hunter? Do we have lost prospector? What do we have? And that gives me an idea, and so I know what I'm looking for, what they might have been wearing in case we do find something along the trail, that kind of thing, how long they've been missing.
So is it important that SALA is capable of ruling out certain areas by working out in the field?
Yes. If we had a large sector to clear, it may be that SALA was used to get direction of travel for someone, and then another dog would take over after that. While she would go off, this was common, to go off and what we call clear a sector, meaning the sections of the search area that were divided off by GPS units. If she would go and clear an area, one of the things that we trained in trailing was to throw a negative. In her behavior, when she was in a negative area where there was absence of the odor she was looking for, she would hunt and throw her head up. Just like she's searching for it, there's nothing here. I could make her go back and finish the area, but if she was throwing negatives, I would call that in.
Was that rewarded as well?
Never in a mission, but yes, in training.
Right. So similar to if she's successful.
Just briefly, if we're done with the exhibit, can it be taken down from publication, please?
Sure. So in terms of training, you had said you reward if she goes from that article to the find, right?
Correct.
And you also reward if she clears an area and throws a negative.
If during training I knew it was a negative area, yes.
Okay. And then, so in these 10 missions in the field, was SALA successful in both excluding areas where no one actually was, and also in a couple of occasions helpful in finding people?
Yes.
Objection as to relevance unless there's dates put on this, and they predate November 2012.
I disagree.
Thank you.
The dates would be nice if you can get them.
Sure, absolutely, I will. So let's do one of each then. Was there an occasion where she helped with the lost girl in the summer of 2012?
Yes.
Can you just explain that to the jury?
That was in Bayfield. We got a call out for a girl that had gone missing. I think it's Highway 501 that intersects with 160 there. She was north of 160. She was in a car with her mom. They got in an argument, and she left the vehicle and ran. I got there, was the first one there. At the point last seen, I collected a scent article from the car of the girl's purse that she had left behind. I used one of her lipstick tubes as a scent article. In what I learned from the incident commander in the area, the mother had seen the girl run in a particular area. So I took Sayla to that area and casted her, what we call casting her there, similar to what we did in that PLS scenario that I was telling you about, to have her pick up the scent, the same scent that's on the lipstick tube. She picked up a direction of travel, and I remember I had field support with me from search and rescue, and she was moving pretty fast. I assumed it was a pretty hot track since we got there within an hour from the girl having taken off. We tracked her through the woods off to the east side of 501 and through Hill and Dale, I like to say, and kept moving. She got to a point where she wanted to cross 501, but there was a lot of traffic, so law enforcement was kind enough to stop traffic. She did work her way through there. Vehicles were stopped. There was gas, odor, cars were running. She kept going, working her way through there, over the road, picked it up across the road and over to 160, where she was throwing some really nice negatives. And so she didn't have scent there at that point. We learned later that after I had done that, let me just back up, they asked me to clear an area over by the water tower, which I did, and she threw negatives over there. What we learned later was this girl had been picked up on 160 in the general area and taken to Walmart by, I think, a friend. So I considered that a success.
So where the trail ended was roughly where she'd been picked up, et cetera?
That was my understanding, yes.
And then was there another case with a lost prospector that would have been after this case that you could just briefly tell the jury about?
Certainly.
Objection relevance if it's after this case, Judge.
Well, it shows the Sayla's reliability, so it is relevant, but a time frame would be nice.
And when was that?
It was, I believe it was September of 2013. And I had my current dog. He was 5 months old, and Sayla was about ready to retire. But I went to this area. It was up about 4 miles north of the trailhead of the Colorado Trail, so it's way up there at a place called the Neglected Mine area in Deer Creek. So it was in there, highly vegetated. Bad weather had set in. I basically went up there the first night to bring coffee. I wasn't anticipating deploying my dog. But I went back the next morning and deployed her. Sorry, I'll keep moving.
Yeah, let me just focus you in on what Sayla did.
I got a scent article that morning from we called him a prospector, his Jeep, and I knew it was his items because the other person that had been lost with him had made his way back, and I was able to communicate with him that this was the gentleman's stuff that who we were looking for. I cast her in really deep vegetation. She started moving down into the Deer Creek area, and I checked her a couple times to make sure we were on the track. And make long story short, she tracked for about 4 miles. We were asked at a certain point if we were sure that we had the correct direction of travel, and I was asked where to put additional assets in the field, and I said just put them, up on the Colorado Trail where we're going to intersect. And we did, and he was there. He was found alive after 3 days.
Okay. Let me ask you a separate question now. You talked about ruling areas out. Was Selah also accurate, and I just want to be general about this, but over all of her work in excluding areas, was she accurate when she excluded an area that a person wasn't later found there, for example?
Yes.
Okay. Was that ever a problem that Selah would go out and clear an area and then that lost person would be found there anyway?
No.
So Selah's overall ability from training and experience, had she demonstrated to you that she could match a human scent to the same human scent from one article to another or from an article to a person, et cetera?
Yes.
Compound.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So I want to focus your attention in now on November of 2012. Were you involved in the search for Dylan Redwine when he was still a missing child?
Yes.
And was that in your capacity as search and rescue?
Yes.
And were people, other members of search and rescue working together trying to find Dylan?
Yes.
Did that include Roy Breland, Butch Knowlton, Katie Steelman, people like that?
Yes.
I want to focus you in on one specific topic in your search and rescue capacity from November 26th of 2012. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Was there a pillowcase that Roy Breland had been using trying to track Dylan Redwine?
That was my understanding, yes.
Okay. And were you aware that that pillowcase was something that Dylan had supposedly slept on and that's why it was a scent article?
Yes.
Would a pillowcase typically, if someone had slept on it, make a good scent article?
Oh, yes.
Were you aware, was it brought to your attention by November 26th that after about a week of him being reported missing, it had led to nothing?
Yes, I did know that.
It hadn't led to Dylan.
Correct.
And it hadn't led to any meaningful trail in a direction that Dylan might be.
Right.
So did your unit, in trying to determine what to do next to find Dylan, have concerns about that pillowcase?
Protection, relevance.
I think it's relevant. Go ahead.
I didn't know there was concern about the pillowcase until I received a phone call from Ron Corkish.
Okay. Let me ask you a different question then. Were you asked to do something to determine if this pillowcase was still going to be helpful in trailing and looking for Dylan?
Yes.
All right. What were you asked to do?
I was asked by Ron Corkish if I could set up some kind of a scenario with Selah to determine whether or not the pillowcase was what we call a good scent article for locating Dylan.
Is Ron Corkish also someone associated with Search and Rescue?
He's the president of Search and Rescue.
Okay. And so he's asking you and Selah, based on your experience in the unit, if you can help out with this.
Yes.
Did you, in fact, help out with this?
I did.
All right. And then where did you go to set up the experiment?
I went, I think the 26th was a Monday night. It was a regular Search and Rescue team at large meeting. And so I met Ron there, and that's where we were going to set up the experiment.
Where is there?
At the meeting, which was at the fairgrounds in the exhibition hall.
Is that a big area?
It's a pretty big area.
Is it close to where Search and Rescue, where you guys normally meet?
Yes, at the time we were meeting upstairs in the general conference room areas up there.
Okay. And to do the experiment, did Roy Breland bring the bagged pillowcase to the experiment?
Yes.
And then also did Butch Knowlton and others from Search and Rescue bring items that had been collected from Dylan's family also bagged?
Yes. When Ron asked me whether I could do this, one of the things I told him was I needed known Dylan Redwine scent articles. And through my conversation with him and previous conversations with him about trailing, he knew how to accurately collect the scent article.
And all that stuff came to you bagged up?
Yes.
So can you explain for the jury what you set up as an experiment?
I set up an experiment in the exhibition hall by, when I arrived, I left my dog in her truck, and I went upstairs to the meeting area. I was gloved. We were Nalgene gloves, and I collected in separate Ziploc bags several different items from other search and rescue people, like whatever they had on them, a wallet, keys, shirt, maybe a glove, various items like I collect search or sent articles, and gathered several. I think I probably got about 20, and brought those down to the exhibition hall area. I was careful to make sure that people who were there watching, there weren't many of them. I recall Ron Corkish being there, another canine handler, Katie Steelman, and the canine handler, Roy Breland, was there. And I had them stay away, off to the side. I kept those lights on the side on, but in the exhibition hall, I could still see, but it was a little darker. And so I set those various articles out around in different areas on the floor, obviously outside their bags. I then took the pillowcase. Roy Breland had it in a Ziploc bag. I changed gloves. I grabbed that. I got that from him. I set that pillowcase out in and amongst these other articles on the floor, so it looked like just another article that was out there. I then, I didn't know what I had in the bags that Ron Corkish had provided, and so I changed gloves and was looking in those bags, and I picked a baseball hat. My thinking was baseball hat, pillowcase. A hat is something also that she'd been used before. So I selected that. It was going to be my first sent article for her. Put it in a Ziploc bag and set it off. Went and got the dog, had her harnessed, clipped, ready to go, and scented her on it. And I let her hunt in there free.
Does that mean off leash?
Off leash.
And did you also, how far apart were these items spaced?
I'm going to say
several feet.
They were, like, these two notebooks are probably like 2 feet apart. They were more like 5 feet apart. There was room in there. I used the whole exhibition hall. They were at least 5 feet apart. And then with amongst and around the rows, it was pretty spread out. Because I didn't want to cross-contaminate that either, so as much as I could. So I left it all way out there, just spread it out.
So after you had the whole thing set up is when you got Selah out of the truck.
Correct.
Scented her and let her work off leash.
I scented her with the baseball hat, gave her the trailing command, which was go find, and let her work. She had done this kind of thing in training. She knew, to use her nose. So she hunted freely in and around there, making sure to hit every article that was there. And through no trained final response, there was no alert behavior. There were negatives. I can't remember how long it took her to do that, but when she was done, she came back up to me.
And that included the pillowcase. She had checked the pillowcase.
She checked the pillowcase too, correct.
And then just generally speaking, you talked about off leash and you talked about people staying away. Were those some precautions you did to avoid queuing?
Yes, that's exactly why I did it.
Did you yourself also stay?
I stayed off to the side, yeah.
And then additionally, Selah had been in the truck when the items were put out, so she wasn't kind of watching what you were doing. So when you got a negative from Selah or no trained final response on the pillowcase or any other item from the ball cap, what did you do next?
The next thing I did was I put the ball cap back in its zip container. Well, I put the dog up first, take her away from the area, put her up, and then I went gloved, obviously, picked up the pillowcase and put it back in its original Ziploc container. I can't remember if I gave that back to Roy or where I put it exactly, but it was away from the, I can call it this, that's kind of the testing area. And then regloved, I was regloving a lot, and I selected, I think it might have been a T-shirt from the other bag.
This is the bag provided of Dylan Redwine's known items.
Right, there were 2 bags of Dylan's known items. I got the baseball hat from one bag, the T-shirt from a different bag, and I put that out in a different area from where the pillowcase was. I put it out also in and amongst, just like I did with the pillowcase. I treated it just the same.
You said a different area? Is that what you said?
Well, I didn't put it right where I had put the pillowcase.
Actually, you didn't want to replace one item with the other?
Right, yeah. I wanted to put it out there just like another object.
Okay, and what about Sayla? Where was Sayla when you did this?
She was in the truck.
Okay, so again, she wasn't watching you do this?
No.
And people still standing back?
Still standing back, minding, yes.
Now you have items out there at least 5 feet apart, still, I think you said like 20 items or something?
Yes.
And now you've switched it up, and now there's a known Dylan article out there. Pillowcase is no longer out there amongst all those other items in a different place.
Yes. So now we have a known Dylan item out there, and I'm using a known Dylan item, the same item I had used the first time.
Then what did you do?
So I went and got the dog, put her harness back on, and sent it her just like I did before, gave her the same trailing extent discrimination command, which was go find. And she, again, went through all the different items. She went to the T-shirt. She went to the bag, one of the bags. She went around more, I think the T-shirt was, if I remember correctly, off to my left. She was over there, showed a lot of alert behavior there, and through a trained final response, which was a sit.
So the sit was at the T-shirt?
Yes.
Is that the only item that she had a trained final response on in the warehouse area?
Yes.
So generally speaking, in search and rescue, was this experiment set up to build evidence in a criminal case, or was this because you needed to know what articles you could trust looking for Dylan out in the woods?
From my perspective, at that point, we wanted to make sure we had a good Dylan Redwine scent article to go find him.
Did you ever use that pillowcase again in the search and rescue case?
The pillowcase? No.
Based on what you learned from this?
No.
Okay. And in your expert opinion, what would you tell this jury about whether or not Dylan's scent was on that pillowcase?
I'd say with a high degree of probability that no, it was not.
But your dog was able to find the real article out there?
Yes.
I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Mr. Bogan? Thank you.
If the people would be kind enough to republish page 1 of 186. Ms. Randolph, this is the certification you received from Chris Goodhue, correct?
That's correct, with Tri-State.
With Tri-State standards, correct?
Correct.
And that this certification happened up in Montana, right?
Yes.
Okay. And
oh, I'm sorry. This test was done up in Denver.
Right, off of 36, right?
She came down, yes. Well, I don't remember exactly. You might know.
And as noted on direct examination, the expiration date on this team, Rae Dreves, now Rae Randolph and Sella, it expired on May 2012, correct?
Correct.
And that's denoted on the certificate, right?
That's right.
So this certification had expired by November 26th when you did the exercise that you just described, right?
By November 26, 2012?
Right.
Yes.
And we can take that down then. You spoke about some of your experience in the field tracking and trailing. You remember talking about that?
Yes.
And obviously, this certification is in trailing, right?
Correct.
And the first example you gave was an instance where you and Selah were asked to help find a young girl in Bayfield, right?
Correct.
And the mission of that case was to find a missing person, in this case, a young girl.
We were looking for her.
Right. You're looking for a girl. You weren't looking for articles, correct?
If there was an article of hers to find, yes.
But the mission was to find a young girl, correct?
Correct.
And as you found out, and as you explained to the jury, first Selah threw up some negatives right around 501, the road, correct?
No, maybe you misunderstood me. She didn't throw the negatives till she hit 160.
Okay. Around 160, she started throwing negatives. And then you were informed that, in fact, this young girl had gotten in a car and was driven to Walmart, correct?
Correct.
And you know from your experience in this specific case and expertise that when the young girl got in the car, that's probably why you were no longer able to find any more scent around her, because that scent went with her into that car.
Perhaps, correct. Or it had dissipated so much. Yeah.
Either the scent had dissipated or the scent had gone with the girl into the car, right?
Correct.
And again, that was a situation where you said mission was to find a person, a young girl, and you were deployed within an hour of when she went missing, correct?
Yes. Approximately.
And you had that scent article, that lipstick scent article, within that hour.
Yes.
Okay. The other example you gave was the case of the lost prospector, right? Okay. And again, that was another situation where the mission was to find a person, right?
Correct.
And as far as the certification trail, going back to that, your certification in May 2010, we got to see the certification trail and explain what that process was one more time for the jury.
A track was laid about a mile long. I think it had to be at least a mile. And it had to age at least 4 hours. There was contamination at the point last seen and what I call a hot cross track, approximately 2/3 of the way toward the end of the trail. The trail that the dog showed wasn't necessarily step for step the way the person walked. But yeah, that's essentially the track. That was her, what she did.
And that scent trail, am I using the right term?
Yeah.
That was roughly about 4 hours old or less than 4 hours?
No, it had to be at least 4
Oh, I'm sorry. So it was at least 4 hours old. Okay. And the purpose of that certification trail exercise was to find a person, correct?
Correct.
Now, the process you described at the fairgrounds, that took place on November 26th, 2012, correct?
Yes.
And to the best of your knowledge, that was several days after Dylan had gone missing, correct?
My understanding was that he went missing on the 19th.
So you have the exact dates down, so that's a week later.
Yes.
And you take pride in your certification in the way you and Selah worked as a team, right?
It's a relationship with a working dog is not like a regular pet.
Right. Exactly. And as you testified, your dog Selah was deployed several times to help find people, and I think you even gave a number as to how many times, right?
10.
And because you relied on her, because search and rescue relied on her, because family members of lost folks relied on her, you wanted to make sure that you worked Selah according to the highest standards you could, correct?
Yes. Certification standards are the lowest standards that you train on. And
you worked Selah to SWIG dog standards as well, correct?
Well, at the time, in 2012, I did not know what a SWIG dog standard was.
In 2012, you were unaware of SWIG dog standards.
That's correct. I was training under tri-state standards.
So the curriculum vitae that you issued as part of the discovery case in this matter, saying that you worked your dogs consistent with SWIG dog standards, doesn't apply to 2012.
I don't think so.
Would looking at your CV help refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Permission to approach the witness?
You may.
Discovery 18714 through 18717. I'm going to draw your attention to bottom of page 2 of your CV.
Bottom of page 2. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. I don't remember when I became aware of SWIG dog.
Okay. But you are aware of the standards of SWIG dog, and you know what it stands for, right?
Yes, but I don't think that they're governing anymore now. But I think it's NIST instead of SWIG dog.
But as your CV says, you try to work your dog, at least at this time, consistent with SWIG dog standards, correct?
Correct.
And you're aware of what those standards are?
Yes.
And SWIG dog stands for Scientific Working Group on
Dog ornithological something. I don't know. Scientific.
permission to collect that?
Yes.
I want to talk about your experience in training with scent articles. And can you describe for the jury one more time what a scent article is in this context, please?
So a scent article is something that is associated with the subject that you're looking for. So it could be anything as small as like a hair tie, your shirt, your socks, your shoes, anything that you've had, that you've handled, that is yours. I don't know how much more specific you need me to get, but this gentleman's red socks are going to have a different odor on them than this gentleman's black socks, for example.
And a scent article can be different material, different fabric, correct?
Well, that's a good question. You want to make sure, like something that's plastic or glass might not be as good of an article as something that's more porous that can retain scent or odor. Because what the dog is looking for are, we call them scent wraps. They're actually just small little cellular pieces of information for the dog. And so you want to keep them, I guess, more porous, like a piece of paper or this piece of plastic I probably wouldn't want to use. But I would use, my hair tie or a sock or something.
And one of the most important concepts for tracking and trailing when we're talking about scent articles, and you're using a scent article to find someone in the wilderness, is that scent article not be contaminated, correct?
You really try not to have that contaminated, right? And the actual article itself.
Right. The actual article, you want an article that, as best as possible, only contains the scent of the person you're looking for.
You try that, yes.
You try that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because if you have a scent article that is contaminated with the scent of another person, that could throw the whole process off, correct?
Well, it depends upon how contaminated, I guess. I mean, I've never done a scientific test along those lines, but if I have, you try to make it as pure as possible. I guess that's my best answer.
You want it as pure as possible because if you have a scent article that has two people's scent on it, the dog might start looking for the wrong person.
Could be.
And the way that a scent article can get contaminated with another person's scent is if that other person touches it, correct?
That could happen, sure.
Meaning if
I pick something up.
I'll go ahead and ask the question. Meaning if I was lost in the wilderness and you and Salo were contracted to come find me, and the scent article that you were provided with was a hoodie that I was supposedly wearing, but had also been worn by Mr. Moran the same day, there'd be a high probability that both our scents would be in that hoodie.
Right, I probably wouldn't use that.
Right. You wouldn't use that, because if you use that hoodie, dog might start looking for Mr. Moran instead of Mr. Bogan, right?
Correct.
And scent articles can get contaminated by touch. They can also get contaminated if someone breathes on them, correct?
Breathed?
Yes, ma'am.
That's a good question. I don't know.
And you provided us with all the training materials that you and Salo relied upon in this exercise, correct? And in your work in trailing and scenting, correct?
For the purposes of the November 26th scenario? I guess I don't understand your question.
You provided us your training materials that you relied upon in working with Salo, in tracking and trailing and everything, correct?
The materials?
Yes, the articles you relied on, the stuff you've read. The materials you rely upon in your expertise.
I see what you're saying. Oh, like the written documentation, I've given you that, yeah, that I had. Other than, in the field, hands-on learning, I can't provide that other than my testimony.
You've also provided us the materials that you've learned from in conducting these exercises and tracking and trailing, correct?
I believe so.
Permission to approach with Discovery 22276.
Yes.
I'm handing you an article that you provided the prosecution to provide to us regarding your expertise in this matter. And that article does in fact say that contamination can happen by other people touching the scent article or even breathing on it, right?
It's highlighted here. Yes, that's what it says.
And because scent articles can get contaminated by touch and breath, it's very important that whoever is using that scent article to find a person do everything they can to keep it free from contamination, correct?
When you're collecting it, absolutely, yes.
And that's because if an item, when it's collected, gets contaminated, it's going to throw the whole process off, right?
Good. Mm-hmm.
And an item, when it's being handled and even provided to search and rescue, if not handled correctly, that could throw the whole process off through contamination, right?
Correct.
And it's your understanding that bedding can be a good scent article, correct?
Yes.
And that's because generally people spend a lot of hours of the day in bed, right?
Some more than others, yes.
On their sheets and pillowcases and all that.
Sure.
So generally speaking, that's a good scent articles.
Yes.
And dogs can be particular in what kinds of scent articles that they'll actually respond to, correct?
Well, that's why you want to vary it while you're training, so they're not always going, you know, with one, because in the field, you're not sure what you're going to come across, like the lipstick example.
Right. But some dogs just won't use certain scent articles, correct? Some dogs just won't alert on socks, and some dogs just won't alert on other items. Dogs are their own individual creatures, correct?
I don't know that to be true, no.
You wouldn't agree with the statement that what works for one team would not work for another?
Can you say that again?
Would you agree with the statement regarding scent articles that what works for one team may not work for another?
In terms of scent articles for trailing, I don't think I would agree with that in my experience in training scenarios.
Permission to approach with Discovery 2227.
Yes.
Turning your attention to some of the training materials that you provided the prosecution that they provided us, I'd ask you if those materials contain a statement saying essentially what works for one team may not work for another. And I can show you where it is on the training literature.
Could you show me? I see that. This person says, I have one dog that just will not track on a sock. Confines of Southern California bloodhound handler.
Hold on
Oh,
a
I'm
second.
sorry.
Hold on a second. Hold on. You ready? Okay. Go ahead.
I see it says when it comes to clothing, what one handler swears by may not be another handler's choice at all.
Thank you.
That's what it says.
And because dogs are idiosyncratic, because contamination is possible, search and rescue, and certainly you want to do everything you can to try and minimize contamination, right?
Yes, that's why you as the handler should collect the article yourself.
Right. Turning your attention to the exercise at the PLATA County Fairgrounds, November 26, 2012, and building on what you just said, you did not personally collect the pillowcase, correct?
No, they came from Colorado Springs, I think.
I'm talking about the pillowcase.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I did not.
And by the same token, you did not personally collect, as you just said, the items from Colorado Springs, correct?
That's correct.
And if I understand the first part of the process is you were presented with the pillowcase, correct?
I knew Roy was bringing it, yes.
But to expedite here, the pillowcase was placed on the floor of the exhibition room at La Plata County Fairgrounds.
Yes.
And the pillowcase was amongst other articles that you had collected, correct?
Correct.
And those other articles came from other members of Search and Rescue, correct? And you listed a few of those articles that you recall that were used in the first part of the exercise.
Correct.
But you didn't document the number of articles used in that first part of the exercise?
I might have put down there approximately 20. I don't recall.
Approximately 20, right?
Correct.
You would agree with me, approximately 20 is not a finite number.
Approximately 20 is not a finite number.
And by the same token, you didn't catalog each and every item that you collected from search and rescue.
No.
So the documentation regarding this exercise, where you're trying to determine if a pillowcase is a good scent article to find a missing boy, we don't have documentation as to how many items were collected in the first part of the experiment or what specific items were collected, correct?
Not other than what I can recall.
Not other than what you can recall.
Correct.
But you understood the import of this mission, correct?
Yes, we were looking for a lost boy.
Right. And the import to make sure that this was on point, well documented, so that everyone could go forward, correct? Looking for this boy.
Yes.
And you testified on direct that SALA did not give a final trained response on the pillow, right? Pillowcase.
A TFR, trained final response on a pillowcase? No, she did not.
And then the second part of the process, let me back up for 1 second, forgive me. The scent article that you used for SALA with the pillowcase, that was a ball cap, right?
Yes.
Okay. And explain to the jury where that ball cap came from, how you got to use it in this first part of the process.
Okay. There were 2 bags of collected scent articles that had come from Dylan's house. Excuse me. And I opened just at random one of them. They were the type of trash bag that had a little, you could tie at the top. Excuse me. And I untied it and opened it and just went with the gloved hand, pulled up the one that was on the top, which was the baseball hat.
And it sounds like there were 2 bags of stuff purported to be Dylan Redwine scent articles, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you pull out the ball cap, and that's the one you use, as you described, to scent SALA, right?
Correct.
And that ball cap was in a bag with other articles, purportedly of Dylan Redwine's, correct?
Yes. From what I recall, they were all, they were all bagged in one bag. They were all bagged, separately bagged.
One big bag where all of the items are, correct?
Correct. All bagged separately.
And then you're telling the jury within that bag, more bags within the bag.
Yes. That's how I told Ron to tell her to do it.
And what you know about the items in both these bags is that they were items collected by Dylan Redwine's family and friends, correct?
All I know is what I told Mr. Corkish to do. I'm assuming they did the way I expected they did.
Well, on your report, it said several articles belonging to Dylan were retrieved by Dylan's family and friends, pursuant to SAR President Ron Corkish directives, correct?
Correct.
So the best knowledge you had was that these items in both bags had been collected by Dylan Redwine's family and friends, right?
To the best of my knowledge, I couldn't tell you who exactly they were. I wasn't there when they collected the articles.
You can't speak to, because you didn't witness how these items were collected.
No, all I know is what I instructed Ron to tell them.
You can't say where they were collected from as well.
I recall something from Ron saying he got them from Dylan's mother. I don't know.
But beyond that, no other specifics.
No.
Now, you testified on direct that you laid out all these items within the exhibition hall about 5 feet apart from one another, right?
Yes.
And were they in a circle? Were they in a grid? Were they random?
They were in kind of a grid in rows.
And it's your understanding that all the scent articles, including the ball cap, came from the same place?
In terms of Dylan's
Yes, ma'am.
items, his property,
Mm-hmm.
that's my understanding, yeah.
The second part of this process, you sent Sayla with the hat, correct?
Correct.
And then you tell her to go free hunt and see what's going on, correct?
Go find, yes.
Go find, that's right. And basically, both of these exercises here, you're trying to find out if the scent on the hat exists on some other materials in the exhibition hall, correct?
Correct.
In the first example, trying to see if the scent on the hat is the scent on the pillowcase.
If she can equate the two, yes.
And then the second part of the exercise, see if the scent on the hat matches what you describe as the T-shirt today.
Yes.
And you would agree with me, it's a very important exercise. You didn't document which scent article you put out on the floor of Dylan's, correct?
I don't recall.
We're looking at your report, help refresh your recollection if you documented what scent article you put out on the floor.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
21.
I didn't mention it was a T-shirt, no.
And you've been trained the importance of record keeping regarding your work in tracking and trailing, correct?
Yes, primarily more so from this second dog, or this fourth dog actually that I have now. Mm-hmm.
But you have within your mind training about the importance of documentation regarding training, certification, and exercises in the field, correct?
If I sit here today?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And how important it is to have documentation as to how reliable, good your dog is, the team is, at these sorts of exercises, right?
As I sit here today?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And you've already said on direct that documentation regarding the team of you and Sayla is no longer exists regarding reliability and exercises and training, correct?
Correct.
And that's because some of that documentation has been lost
Correct.
and some of that documentation just didn't occur, correct?
Correct.
And as you sit here today and reflecting back on 2012, the team of you and Sayla is certified in trailing, correct?
In 2012?
Yes.
Yes.
And you know from the SWIG dog standards that you've already told the jury you're familiar with, that according to SWIG dog, the primary goal in trailing is for the canine to detect and follow the track and trail to the exclusion of all other tracks and trails leading to a specific location, person or article associated with that person, right?
Correct.
Trailing, supposed to try and find people, right?
As it says there, people, articles, I forget the third one is, yes.
Persons, location, or articles, right?
Persons, locations, or articles,
Right.
That's right.
And you know from your training expertise and the fact that it says on your CV that you're more than conversant in SWIG dog standards, that SWIG dog has different standards for different activities of dogs, correct?
Different disciplines?
Different disciplines, thank you.
Yes.
Meaning the disciplines for a dog trying to find explosives, the requirements under SWIG dog are going to be different for an explosive-seeking dog than a trailing dog, correct?
There's a different standard for more forensic type of disciplines for dogs.
Right. But to answer my question, the requirements are different for drug and bomb sniffing dogs than for trailing dogs.
From what I understand, I don't use a bomb or drug dog, but that's what I understand.
But you're aware what SWIG dog does, and that they have different requirements for different disciplines.
Objection has been answered.
I think it has been, Mr. Bogan.
Now, if we can put up the first page of 186 one more time. Or actually, that's not necessary because that's just do as you go. And this is foundational, the team of Rae Randolph and Sela certified in trailing and tracking, at least from May 2010 to May 2012, correct?
Yes, and it's specifically trailing, not
Trailing.
tracking.
Okay,
Yes.
trailing. And that certification is not in scent identification lineups, is it?
Well, that's part of the definition of trailing is the scent discrimination discipline.
Well, not according to SWIG dog, of which you subscribe to, correct?
I trained her in trailing as a scent discrimination dog.
Right, but she is not certified in scent identification lineups, correct?
She's certified through tri-state standards, and that is what I trained her under as a scent discrimination trailing dog per tri-state standards.
Right. But you're saying scent discrimination trailing. What you're not saying is scent identification lineups, correct?
Well, I think we're splitting hairs there. They're one and the same in terms of training and what the dog needs to learn.
Well, we're splitting hairs, but another entity that splits those hairs is SWIG dog, who sets the standards for all of these disciplines that you're aware of, correct?
Objection, I mischaracterized the SWIG dog.
Doesn't, Judge.
Well, that's something I can't rule on. I don't know. Go ahead, Mr. Bogan.
You understand SWIG dog that you rely on and are conversant in has different standards for trailing and for scent identification lineups, correct?
Well, they might have different standards, but SWIG dog is not an active training testing entity. They set guidelines, and they're not, from what I understand, they are no longer the governing entity. It's NIST. But what I trained my dog in trailing was commensurate with the tri-state standards, which is a scent discriminatory discipline. And a lot of, as I explained to the jury, a lot of our training methodology was to train the dog in scent discrimination and identification. In terms of a lineup, I understand as an attorney that might be a term of art, but if you've got a line of different articles, absolutely that is something that the dog was trained in as part of her scent discrimination training.
She has no certification in scent identification lineup, correct?
She has.
Asked and answered multiple times, Judge. The witness has answered in detail.
I think that's correct, Mr. Bogan.
Now, you understand that, well, you've already told the jury that you work your dog according to SWIG dog standards, right? That's in your CV.
Yes.
And what SWIG dog says to get certified and scent identification lineup is there's some very specific accreditations and tests the team has to pass, correct?
SWIG dog is not a testing entity.
But they set the guidelines for those tests.
They set guidelines. They're not mandates.
Well, for someone who works their dog consistent with SWIG dog guidelines, they kind of are.
Actually, Judge, the witness has already answered in terms of timeline regarding this question, so this entire line of questioning is misleading.
Go ahead, Mr. Booker.
It's certainly not misleading. What's going on here is that trailing and scent identification lineups are two different practices. And
Well, I assume, I won't assume anything. She has testified that at the time this occurred, she wasn't even aware of SWIG dog. So this line of questioning for up to the time of what happened in November of 2012, I don't think is particularly relevant. However, I'm going to let you, I think you've established, well, I don't know if you've established, you've tried to establish that SWIG dog has different guidelines. And if you want to ask the question that way, I'll let you do it. But in terms of trying to get her to say that they have to be certified, this dog was not certified by SWIG dog, I'm not going to let you go there because it doesn't make any sense.
you understand that SWIG dog, the scientific working group, has different standards for scent identification, lineup, and trailing, correct?
Yes. As I sit here today, yes.
And that's because those are different practices that require different skills according to the scientific working group, correct?
According to them, that's probably true.
Right. And you're aware that according to the scientific working group, there's different standards to get accredited in scent identification lineups, correct?
My understanding.
Asked and answered.
That, I think, that answer is going to be the same as you had before, so yes, I'm going to sustain that objection. You may need to establish that through a different witness if you can. So let's move on from that topic.
Nothing further for this witness, Judge.
Okay. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Randolph, let me do some, I'm going to touch on topics addressed by defense counsel. But first, I realized, thanks to counsel, that I hadn't explained People's 186. Rae Dreves, is that just you and your previous name?
Yes,
Okay. So this is a certification for you and Selah as a team.
that's correct.
There was some talk about the pillowcase in 7 days having passed. If someone had slept on a pillowcase and 7 days had passed, is that an odor that your Selah would still be able to work with?
My understanding is, and maybe I don't understand the question, but from the 19th when Mr. Vreeland collected it to the 26th, it was in a plastic bag in Mr. Vreeland's custody. I don't think anybody slept on it.
Let me ask you a better question. Let's say, for argument's sake, that someone sleeps on a pillowcase, and if that pillowcase is collected with gloves and bags and brought to you and 7 days pass, is Selah still going to be able to work with that odor?
Yes. I would have collected the article myself instead of having somebody else hand it to me, though.
Sure, and in this case, if Roy Vreeland had used gloves and a bag and collected it himself, that's exactly what you would do, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask you, so in terms of the T-shirt and the hat, those items were presumably not touched by Dylan for even a longer period of time because they came from Colorado Springs, right?
That's my understanding.
And they were still sent on those articles.
Yes.
Is it standard when someone's missing and you're looking to find them to ask loved ones to collect those items?
I know from other teammates around the country that I know, in those types of scenarios where it's not possible that you have one, yeah, it's not the most effective or best way to, it's not the best practices, but I have heard of it being done.
Right. So, like, for example, if you don't have an item to trail with, you might have to rely on someone who knows that person to go collect it, and you'd advise them how to collect it, et cetera.
Absolutely, yes.
But in the real world, there's always a possibility that that item's been touched by more than one person, right?
It could be. You really try to keep it as uncontaminated as possible.
Right. And that's from the point in which you entered the situation on, right?
Correct.
But clothing items, for example, we don't know if his mother picks up the T-shirt and throws it in the hamper, right? We don't.
I specifically told Mr. Corkish it couldn't be something that was in like the clothes hamper with the other family.
With the other families, I understand.
Yeah.
What I'm asking you is more specific. You ask family members to get you the best article they can, but you don't know if something is perhaps breathed on or something like that, right?
Correct.
You still work with those articles on a regular basis?
Those that were, I don't trail with my current dog.
Okay. Another bad question from me.
Okay.
You rely upon family members at times, if you have to collect items in a certain way and bring them to you.
Yes.
But necessarily, you're never going to know if someone breathed on it or something like that, right?
Correct.
But if someone's missing, that's an article that in the field in search and rescue is still going to be used for trailing, right?
Yes.
And you talked a little bit about SALA working amongst multiple scents because things can become contaminated, right?
That's why we train that way.
Okay. So would you trust SALA in those circumstances to still be able to do the work?
Yes, absolutely.
You wrote a report in this case, right?
Yes.
It wasn't a police report, but it was a mission log for search and rescue, right?
Correct.
And you put some of those details in there, et cetera, right?
Correct.
And then after that, did you get back to work on the case of actually trying to find Dylan?
Yes.
Did you do that with the pillowcase or the ball cap?
I took the ball cap.
The last thing I want to ask you about is just kind of a hypothetical. So we talked about what kind of articles you had available, things like that. But if there were a situation where, let's just say, the defendant was asked if there were any of Dylan's items, the search was sent, and he said no, and they had to ask him for the pillowcase, and that was the best they could get, would you still try to search for Dylan with that pillowcase?
No, I would have insisted that I go in and get one myself.
Right, you would have collected it, right?
Correct.
But if you were told the only item, there's nothing else, if he had told you there's nothing else in the house that belongs to Dylan, and you knew he had said Dylan slept on that pillowcase, would you go collect that pillowcase and try to use it?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. Yes.
The information that you get from someone.
Yeah, you want to go with that. I wasn't there, so I don't know the circumstances.
Sure, and I'm asking you a hypothetical, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in that circumstance, in that life or death situation, you're going to work with the best item you can get, right?
Yes.
And that's going to be based on the information that you get from the person.
Correct. That's what I do with the lost prospector, yes.
Thank you.
Any questions from the jury? Counsel? Question from the jury. SELA certification was expired. Do dogs have to be certified in order to be working dogs like SELA was for search and rescue, or is that just an extra step?
That's a good question. It's not necessary in La Plata County Search and Rescue, and it varies in the volunteer world of search and rescue. It wasn't necessary, but it was something that I wanted to do for her.
All right. Any follow-up?
Is that true even today, Ms. Randolph?
That's my understanding. Yes, I understand that with the local La Plata County Search and Rescue Canine Team, there are certain field-ready guidelines that people have to pass in terms of being field mobile, but I don't think that there's a certification test.
And was Sayla up to speed at the time of 2012?
Oh, yes.
Anything, Mr. Bogan?
So on November 26, 2012, she wasn't certified, but she could still do this exercise.
Yes, again, the certification standard this is across the board with all working dogs. The certification standard is the lowest standard by which you train. So she was certified. It had expired by May, but her training level was above what the certification standards were.
And what we know from prosecution exhibit 186, she was certified at level 1, not level 2, 3, or upwards from there, correct?
You had to start at level 1.
Right.
So that's where you start.
And nothing beyond that. She's not certified, wasn't certified at level 2 or 3 or anything above that.
No, I don't know that there was a 3. There might have been a 3. Yeah.
Nothing further.
Okay. This witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
By all means.
Thank you, Ms. Randolph. I always get your name wrong, sir.
I know.
You're free to go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our morning recess. We will start up again at 10:20. Please remember don't discuss this case amongst yourselves. Wait until I tell you can begin your deliberations to start talking about it. Don't talk to anybody else either. So, everybody rise for the jury. Okay, we'll be in recess.